Welcome back to another Reaper blog video. Here's what's new in Reaper 7.16. Envelope Manager. When ctrl-alt-clicking visible or ARM UI columns, treat as set exclusive. When setting envelope visible, auto-scroll arrange view to make it visible. So we can bring up the envelope window anytime by clicking the envelope button on a track, just a left click. And that brings up this window. You can have this doctor floating. And I showed this in a previous update video. It was recently updated to this sort of grid view with these columns, and it's just much simpler to manage. So as for what's new, Command-Alt-Click or Control-Alt on Windows, click in any of the columns. You can see that this envelope lane here is only showing one of these parameters at a time. So we're exclusively showing them. And as I'm clicking on the visible, it is also automatically setting to ARM and active because that's just what it does. So a shortcut to sort of swap out and show only one particular envelope lane. And this works with the track parameters as well as plugin automation. And if we're scrolled down and then click on any of these parameters, Reaper will jump up to make sure that that envelope is visible in the arrange view. Color theme. Add theme elements for region and marker edge, selected and unselected. Regions. Support selecting regions mirrored in Region Manager. Affects rendering selected regions by clicking them in the ruler. All right, so theme colors for regions and markers has changed. So we're going to go to the action list. We're going to go to theme tweak. And this theme development show theme tweak configuration window, run and close. And if we search for marker edge, there is this new marker number and edge selected theme tweaks that we can make. So let's put in a marker here. And the default color is this red. And I can change this to blue. And now it puts a blue outline around that marker. If we select a marker by clicking on it, that has a different color, which is now white. So I might just change that back to like the default color and then make my highlighted color different. So something like that. So those should have been the default colors there that you saw before. This one is selected. This marker was not selected. Or maybe you want to have black as your default marker text and outline color. So there you go. When it's touched, it's selected, and it has a different color. So you can see which was the last touched. Then there's also this for regions. Region text and edge, region text and edge selected. Let's just drop in some regions. And so these regions are unselected. And if I click on one, it changes that to a white outline. So we could just change this to be black as my selected or unselected. So there's a unselected color and then click on it and it's selected. The colors change, the outline changes. And in addition to that, selecting regions used to be that you right click, there's a menu item called select region. That would sort of add a squared off border and you could see which one was selected. We could really only select one at a time in the arrange view like this, but now we can press shift and you can select multiples. Select this one, command click on that one. I can select two without selecting another. And if I hold shift, as I click on each one, it's adding just one at a time. If we go into the view menu and then region marker manager, the selection thing is still the same as it was before. You could select multiples here, and multiples selected will apply to when rendering. We have this option of selected regions. That's all that does. So essentially, clicking on one of these regions now marks it active in this selected regions function in the render window. Only difference is that instead of right-clicking and then selecting it, or having to go into the region marker manager and shift-clicking in here, You can now do it from the arrange view. Control surfaces. Add option to close devices while rendering. Do not send feedback to open devices while rendering. So this is actually one of the things that I requested a little while ago. I'm glad that they got this in there. So let's go to the preferences. Let's go to Control OSC Web. At the bottom here, close control surface devices when rendering. Off by default. I enabled it here because, yeah, it's a thing I asked for, so of course I'm going to. And then when you're rendering, especially when using the batch render, it used to be that, like, you know, Reaper renders really quickly. So when you're doing a batch render of a bunch of projects, my control surface would just like jump up and then all the faders would slam down a second later and then jump up again as the next project loads, and then all the faders would slam down again when it unloads. And it was just really annoying. It was frequently very annoying. And if you're doing like a real-time render, doing an online render, the faders would move and stuff as the automation plays back, but it doesn't really need to, right? The control surface doesn't need to be active during rendering, especially offline rendering. And so now the faders just pop down, the sort of reset to default, it just renders. And it's less distracting having the faders jump around while you can't actually interact with it. So I think that's a really nice thing. Like I said, it's something I asked for a while ago because it was frequently an issue with batch rendering. It was annoying. Import. When importing media with embedded tempo information into an empty project, optionally prompt to adjust project tempo to media tempo. When importing media with unknown tempo, if user preference is to prompt for behavior, prompt using a best guess tempo estimate. So preferences, media, import. When importing multiple media items, always prompt. This is what I have selected. I don't remember what the default is, but always prompt is selected here. And now I'm just going to grab a file. I don't want to use a Rex file because it probably won't show me the function. It has its own sort of time stretching thing. But currently this project is at 120. And if I grab this tambourine loop and then import it, I now get this window here. Media might be 110 BPM, but it might not be. We can adjust the project to media tempo or do not adjust project to media tempo. So this is new. There was never an option to set your project tempo based on files that you're importing into your project. I think that's pretty cool. It makes sense to have that. We only had like the opposite where we could conform loops and samples to the project tempo using the buttons in the toolbar. So let's adjust project to media tempo. And now based on the settings that I have in project settings, this window, it's changed from 120 to 110. And actually, because I have this force tempo to whole samples, it's actually 109.999. But yeah, now this sample is playing back at 110, which is the original tempo, so there's no time stretching happening in there. Hey, if you like these kind of videos, why not support me on Patreon or as a YouTube member? There's a link down below. Thanks so much. Media Explorer. Add list header context menu to move column to far left. Support shift-click on column header to move to far left. Support adding or deleting existing image metadata for MP3 files. Support retaining separate channel mappings for each file for each channel count for all files or not at all. These are options in channel mapping window. When previewing stereo file with both source channels mapped to both output channels, import media with mono channel mode and +6 take volume. So there's quite a bit of new stuff here in the Media Explorer. I'm just going to show you some of my settings here. So if I right click in this empty area, I'm going to have this options menu. And I have a few things enabled here, like apply preview volume to inserted media item and apply normalized volume to inserted media item. So I have a file here. It's a stereo file, and I can see that because it says stereo at the bottom, and there's two waveforms. But if I actually want to change this, I can click on the stereo button, and this media channel mapper function comes up. So the retain functions are here, separate channel map for each file, for each channel count, same channel mapping for all files, or do not retain channel mapping. I think probably for my workflow, I think I'll want to keep this minimal and set this to do not retain. But otherwise, you can kind of customize these pins. So if you did this, this is going to be a volume boost because it's the same channel to both channels. So this is the default, but if we want channel 1 to route to both channel 1 and 2, so a dual mono sort of just left or just right, or all the buttons filled in, and we import this, go to item properties. In this window here, you can see that the channel mode is set to mono mix, and the volume is actually 6 dB louder than the original volume. And that's because right here, I have my preview volume at minus 5.78. Remember when I showed you in the options that I had the apply preview volume? Yeah, so minus 5.78 plus 6 equals 0.22. And that was the imported volume to keep in mind the channel mode. And because retain was off, that reset as soon as I did that. But if we have this set for each file, it's going to remember that. So I'll just do that for that one. Play a different file, goes back to stereo, back to this one, stereo, and it's modified. We could do this. And import that. And this time it's imported as a mono file. Because it actually doesn't get louder when routing it in this way, it didn't get that 6 dB volume boost. It's just for more sort of consistency between what you're listening to in the Media Explorer, whether you've adjusted the volume or adjusted the channels, and then import. You don't want a volume difference between those two things. So that's the channel mode stuff. Next thing is, if we right-click on a column header, we can move this column to the far left. Well, we can actually select which one goes to the far left here. So maybe title will move to the far left. We can also do a shift click, move the clicked column into the first sort of slot. So I can set the genre as my far left column. I can do the description or bring back the file. And yeah. So this is just something that makes browsing and searching a little easier because you can put the most important column on the left, on the far left, so it's nice and easy. And the last thing to talk about is the image metadata. So if I right-click, I can go to Edit Image Metadata, and then I can put in a description, file name. I can browse for a file to import, and then the type of image file there. And this only works for MP3s. For the MIDI editor, add action to insert CC at edit cursor in current lane. All right, so I've got some MIDI here. I'm going to open up a MIDI CC lane, and let's say mod wheel. And so we can go into the action list. So with the Media Explorer focused, open up the action list and make sure that it says section MIDI editor. And then what we're looking for in here is add CC, insert CC event at edit cursor in current lane. I have that assigned to Shift C. That's not the default, but that's what I found useful. Wherever my edit cursor is parked, I can press Shift C. That's going to put a point in that envelope lane. So let's park one there. Let's go to here and let's just adjust that. And so it'll interpolate between those 2 points. Along with other controls, like let's say edit adjust value for events, mouse wheel, or MIDI controller only. So I can just click, I can press Shift C to add a point. I can control mouse wheel to move that up. I can even use the arrow keys to move the cursor position, add a new point, and then just roll that down, that sort of thing. Pretty simple. Surprised it took this long to get that particular feature, but yeah, that's great. I think that'll be really helpful for people that are more keyboard focused rather than mouse focused. This may be really helpful for visually impaired users as well. For preferences, add maximum stretch marker handle size configuration and allow resizing window. So back to the preferences, yeah, this window is now resizable. So there's Still sort of the minimum size, which is about what I was using before. But certain windows are going to be nicer for resizable. Maybe the mouse modifiers. You can adjust this or big, have more room for the description. Or in the MIDI devices list, you can see everything a little more clearly. If you have a lot of items, you can resize the columns. And when you're not using that particular page, you can always shrink it back down to the sort of the small default. The other new thing was stretch markers. Preferences, appearance, media, maximum stretch marker handle size. I actually have this above the defaults right now. So let's set this to default 6 pixels and 12% of the take height. Import some audio. Good old tambourine loop again. I'm going to turn off snapping and I will insert a stretch marker. All right, so there's the default stretch marker size. It is 6 pixels tall and taking up no more than 12% of the whole take, or take or item if there's only one. And you can see that it does shrink. If that default of 6 pixels is too small, we could set this to something like 15. So there's 15, so that's a much bigger handle. Easier to grab that. You still have to kind of look for the cursor to change, but it is easier to grab that. And then when you don't need it, you can shrink down the track, and then it's still going to only take up 12% of the take height. So let's set this to something really big. Let's say 50 and 50. And now they're huge. They're taking up 50 pixels max, or up to half of the item. So here where I have the take quite small in height, the stretch markers are still quite big. So yeah, that could be really helpful or not. It's entirely up to you. That's why it's a preference. It looks like 30% is actually the maximum amount. 100 pixels and 30% is the maximum, but that's pretty darn big. So yeah, that's cool. Project. Show indicator on ruler if project maximum length has been enabled. So project maximum length, we're going to find that under File and then Project Settings. And in this window, we come over to the Advanced page and we can set a limit of the project length. So it will automatically stop playback and recording at this point. It will also limit the amount that you can zoom out. So this is set the default. I've got this at 3 hours, but we could set this to like, I don't know, 36 minutes and then hit OK. And now you can see a little icon, kind of like a marker. And that is the project length limit. And you can't interact with that. But if I am playing the project, put my edit cursor right here, it will play until that point, or it will record until that point and then stop automatically. It would be really helpful to be able to grab that and move it. So like a true end marker, we have to type in the amount here. So yeah, project length limit indicator, pretty cool. Fix grouping after action to split items under mouse. So I don't usually cover anything that they say is fixed in the changelogs, but I found this one to be an exception because it wasn't just fixing the one action, they actually added some new actions. So for split item under mouse, this is a new action, and the previous version is split item under mouse ignore grouping. They renamed the old one and then added another one that is more like the intuitive function. So I've got these items grouped, and if I use this action, let's say split item under mouse cursor, ignore grouping, I've just assigned split item under mouse cursor, ignore grouping to Shift Control S. This is the old action. I can tell it's an old action just based on the command ID number. So yeah, I can hover my mouse wherever I want a split, press Control Shift S, and it puts in a split at that point. I don't have to click first. I'm using the keyboard and I'm just using the mouse as where I am going to click. Because I had the items actually selected, it was doing both tracks at once. But otherwise, it's only doing the one under the mouse, the item under the mouse. Now, this other action, the newer one, split item under mouse cursor. All right, so I did a heal on those. Items not selected, I'm going to Control-Shift-S. And that is splitting both items equally, the exact same position on both of these, because they're grouped as they should be. Okay. The other new actions here, so the ones that are 4, 2, 5, 7, select right, select/crossfade left. I'll show you what that one does. So select right. So I hover over an item, back to the arrange view. So that keeps this item selected, so then you can immediately copy or cut or duplicate. It just makes it the active item. And the select left, same keyboard shortcut, and it's just going to split and keep the left side of that split active. Track panels. Add action to show hide entire track control panel area. Add separate actions to toggle between primary and alternate TCP widths or show hide TCP area. Improve behavior of Ctrl-Alt record arm button click. There's a new action which basically does this function where you double click on the track control panel area and it disappears. So sometimes it's a little hard to get that sort of double arrow there, but that is now a function that can be toggled from the action list or assigned to a keyboard shortcut. So we just search for toggle and TCP. View toggle show TCP area. That's going to hide that. And then we also have the toggle to alternate TCP area width. And so again, that might be off and on with default setting, or we can set this to like, really wide. And it will toggle between those two settings. Or again, hidden or toggling those settings. It's essentially the last two settings can be toggled. The Control-Alt record arm button is an exclusive record enable button for that track. It was not set up to work with grouped tracks before, so let me just group these tracks. I'll just hit all on that. And so now these tracks are grouped, and the Control-Alt-Click. On Mac, it is Command-Alt-Click for exclusive toggle. And on Windows, it's Control-Alt. That now works with grouped tracks. For Windows, add preference to disable effects windows during render. I just have a screenshot of that preference on Windows. Disable effects windows while rendering. A user recently ran into an issue where he was rendering something and then he adjusted a plugin while it was rendering, which shouldn't be possible, but it was. And then it ended up crashing. So now that's toggleable, but disabling that may also affect any sort of visualizer plugins that you have on screen. They may not update. So just be aware of that new function if you're on Windows, but most users are probably not going to be in a situation where this is important. And that's it for this What's New in Reaper edition. Some pretty cool stuff in there. This is a pretty long video, but I think there's some good stuff in there. And yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Support the Reaper blog on Patreon. Or visit reaper.blog for more tutorials.